The end of the year does something strange to people. The world slows down just enough for memories to catch up. Calendars reset, conversations change, everyone starts asking the same questions. For most people, the end of the year is noisy: parties, messages, recaps, highlights. But for loners, it's different. For loners, the end of the year is quiet. And that quiet is not empty, it's heavy. Because loners don't just remember what happened, they remember what it cost. While others count milestones, loners count moments they survived alone, moments nobody clapped for, moments nobody noticed, moments where they had to hold themselves together without witnesses. The end of the year doesn't just pass through a loner, it stays. It sits in the chest. It asks questions that were easy to avoid all year long. Did I choose peace? Or did I choose isolation? Did I grow? Or did I just learn how to endure? Did I walk away because it was right? Or because I got tired of being misunderstood? This is why December feels heavier for loners. Not because they're sad, but because they're honest. Psychology tells us that people who spend long periods alone develop a stronger internal narrative. They don't process life out loud, they process it inward. And when the year ends, that inner voice gets louder. For most people, the year ends externally. For loners, it ends internally. They replay conversations they never finished. They remember versions of themselves they had to abandon to survive. They think about people they outgrew without closure. They remember nights they went to sleep early, not because they were tired, but because silence felt safer than disappointment. And here's the part nobody talks about. Loners don't feel the end of the year deeply because they're emotional. They feel it deeply because they were present. They noticed patterns while others were distracted. They felt shifts while others were numbing themselves. They saw relationships changing long before they officially ended. Loners are observers by nature. They don't rush through experiences, they absorb them. So when the year ends, it's not just 12 months closing. It's a chapter being audited. Every compromise they made, every boundary they didn't protect, every time they stayed quiet to keep peace, every time they chose distance instead of confrontation. The brain doesn't forget those decisions, it stores them. Neurologically, reflection intensifies when external stimulation drops. And the end of the year removes distraction, schedules loosen, noise fades, and what remains is the self. That's why loners feel restless in December, not lonely, restless, because solitude stops being an escape and becomes a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. Loners don't fear being alone at the end of the year. They fear realizing how much they adapted to survive it. They ask themselves questions most people avoid their entire lives. When did I stop explaining myself? When did I stop expecting people to understand? When did silence become my default instead of my refuge? This is the psychological paradox of loners. They're strong enough to stand alone all year. But the end of the year forces them to confront why they had to. While others are celebrating survival, loners are analyzing damage, not dramatically, quietly, precisely. And that precision hurts, because loners don't romanticize the past, they remember it accurately. They remember how certain friendships slowly turned one-sided, how conversations became shallow, how their presence was only noticed when it disappeared, how being low maintenance slowly turned into being overlooked. The end of the year exposes that truth. And truth is heavier than sadness. That's why loners often withdraw even more during this time, not because they're depressed, but because reflection requires space. Psychologically, this is called meaning-making, the brain trying to extract lessons from experience, and loners do this deeply. Or did I become calmer, or just quieter? Did I become selective, or emotionally closed? Did I heal, or did I simply stop feeling? These are dangerous questions. But loners are used to dangerous thoughts. The end of the year strips away performance. No roles, no distractions, no pretending. And loners feel it more deeply because they were never pretending to begin with. They were surviving honestly. And honesty, when the year ends, demands a reckoning. To understand why loners feel the end of the year so deeply, you have to go further back than December. You have to go back to where their nervous system learned its first rule about the world. For many loners, emotional self-reliance didn't start as a choice. It started as an adaptation, not always through loud trauma, not always through chaos, sometimes through something much quieter. inconsistency, emotional absence, being heard sometimes, ignored other times, being praised for being mature when what they really were was unattended. The brain learns early what is safe to expect, and for loners, the lesson was simple. Do not rely too much, do not expect too much, do not need too much. So they learn to regulate themselves. Psychology calls this early self-soothing, but what it really means is this. They learn to carry their emotional weight alone. And here's why the end of the year hits that wiring so hard. The nervous system remembers patterns, not calendars. When the world slows down, when routines break, when social noise fades, the brain starts scanning inward. It checks for unresolved emotional loops. For loners, there are many. Unspoken goodbyes, relationships that faded without explanation, versions of themselves that had to shrink to stay accepted, moments where they realized nobody was coming to emotionally rescue them. Throughout the year, loners manage this well. They stay functional, they stay composed, they stay ahead of their emotions. But the end of the year removes urgency. This is where the weight comes from. Loners don't miss people at the end of the year the way others do. They miss safety, they miss alignment, they miss versions of themselves that felt lighter before they learned restraint. And this creates a strange emotional state. Not sadness, not nostalgia, a quiet pressure. Because loners are not grieving what happened this year, they're grieving what didn't. The conversations that never reached honesty, the bonds that never deepened, the effort that was never returned. Neuroscience shows that unmet emotional expectations create more stress than loss itself. And loners carry a lifetime of quietly unmet expectations. They don't explode about it, they internalize it. That's why the end of the year feels like compression. Everything they postponed feeling comes back at once. And here's the dangerous part. Loners don't distract themselves from this discomfort. They sit with it. They don't drown it in parties. They don't mask it with noise. They don't romanticize it. They analyze it. They ask themselves brutal questions. Most people never ask these questions. Loners do, every year. And every year the answers become sharper. This is why loners often change at the end of the year. They cut off more cleanly. They speak less. They tolerate less emotional chaos. Not because they're colder, but because clarity hardens boundaries. The nervous system of a loner doesn't crave excitement. It craves predictability, safety, consistency. And when the year ends, the brain reassesses which relationships provided that and which quietly drained it. This is why some people don't make it into a loner's next year. Not out of anger, out of accuracy. Loners don't carry people forward out of habit. They carry people forward only if their presence feels regulating, not destabilizing. This is also why loners often feel guilty in December. Not because they did something wrong, but because they're aware of how many people they emotionally outgrew. And growth comes with grief. The world calls this coldness. Psychology calls it boundary consolidation. So while others are making resolutions about doing more, loners are making decisions about needing less explaining, less tolerating, less emotional labor. The end of the year doesn't make loners sad. It makes them honest about what they can no longer carry. And honesty, when it finally arrives, is heavy. But it's also freeing. By the time the new year arrives, loners are already different people. Not loudly, not dramatically, but internally, something is restructured. While others step into January chasing motivation, resolutions, and external change, loners step into the new year with subtraction. This is where most people misunderstand them. Loners don't reset their lives, they refine them. Psychologically, this is an identity consolidation phase. The brain stops experimenting and starts selecting. What stays, what drains, what aligns, what destabilizes, and once that selection happens, there is no nostalgia strong enough to reverse it. This is why loners don't go back in the new year. They don't rekindle dynamics that already proved unsafe. They don't romanticize what once felt familiar but never felt secure. Because familiarity without safety is not comfort, it's conditioning. Loners learned this lesson early, and every year-end reinforces it. This is also why loners seem emotionally distant when the year turns. They're not numb, they're integrated. They've already processed the loss, already felt the grief, already accepted the reality. So when January arrives, there's no emotional chaos left to act out. Instead, there's calm, quiet resolve, and an internal rule that doesn't get spoken out loud. This is not avoidance. This is discernment. And here's the part people rarely see. Loners do feel deeply at the end of the year, but they don't externalize it. They metabolize it. They turn reflection into structure, pain into precision, disappointment into boundaries. That's why they don't chase closure. Closure already happened internally. That's why they don't explain their distance. Explanation is only needed when you're unsure. Loners aren't unsure. They know exactly why certain people didn't make it forward. They know exactly where their energy leaked. They know exactly which dynamics cost them peace. And peace, once tasted, becomes non-negotiable. This is why loners often look stronger at the start of a new year. More contained, more grounded, less reactive. They're not carrying unresolved emotional debt anymore. While others are still dragging old stories into January, loners close the book in December. This is also why loners don't fear another year alone. They already know the truth. Loneliness is not being alone. Loneliness is staying where you feel unseen. And solitude, chosen intentionally, feels safer than any crowd that requires performance. So when the new year begins, loners don't promise themselves to change who they are. They promise themselves to stop betraying who they've become. They promise to protect their nervous system, to honor their boundaries, to choose clarity over attachment. And yes, sometimes that means fewer people. But it also means fewer wounds. This is the paradox most people never understand. Loners don't end the year empty. They end it distilled, stripped of illusions, freed from emotional noise, aligned with themselves. And when someone like that walks into a new year, they don't need motivation. They already have direction. So if the end of the year hits you harder than most, if you feel quieter instead of celebratory, heavier instead of excited, understand this. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not disconnected. You are processing at a depth most people avoid. And when the new year arrives, you won't walk into it desperate for change. You'll walk into it already changed.